The stimulus article of Memory in Our Democracy, written by Colin Powell, states, I grew up and chose a soldier's life. I lost close friends in war. Later, I commended young men and women who went willingly into harm's way for our country, some never to return. A day doesn't pass that I don't think of them. This quote gives us an insight into Powell's lives and how, to this day, he still remembers all the friends and soldiers who lost their lives to war. The clear grief that Mr. Powell experiences from these deaths, even after so much time has passed, is something that I deeply resonate with, as I too went through something similar. On September 15th of 2022, I lost two of my friends to a lightning accident while we were rowing. Although some time has passed from the incident, like Mr. Powell, there isn't a day where I don't think of them. I feel anxious when I see lightning or rain, and I can't help but feel sad whenever I remember all of the good times that we had together. Good morning, my name is Fernando Chirinos, and this is my presentation on grief's contribution to depression and anxiety in teenagers. My research question is, how does grief following the death of a loved one contribute to the development of depression and anxiety in teenagers aged 14 to 18? With my argument being that the public's lack of knowledge and inefficient ways of supporting teenagers who have faced the death of a loved one are a large part as to why the grief that occurs from the situation greatly contributes to depression and anxiety in teenagers. The death of a parent. The death of a parent is something that can greatly impact teenagers' everyday life. From the stimulus article, My Mother's House, written by Rachel Katsi Gansa, it illustrates the process of loss in Gansa's life. With various family members passing away, it showcases the gradual confrontation of mortality, not just through one singular event, but as a continuous, inevitable part of life. The line, called away by either death or work, signals permanence of death and how each loss forces Gansa to reconcile with the concept of her own mortality. Additionally, the death of a parent, regarding the cause, forces teenagers to confront the realization of the situation. In the academic article, Maintaining Everyday Life in a Family with a Dying Parent, Teenagers' Experience of Adapting to Responsibility, written by Ruff Sandel from Lund University, held a study in which they interviewed a variety of teenagers with dying parents. The results from the study showed that majority of the teenagers had a hard time adapting to their new life, oftentimes picking up new chores or tasks to try to make life for their dying parent as easy and comfortable as possible. However, what the results also showed is that the majority of teenagers that did this oftentimes hid away their own feelings from their parents, as they did not want to feel like an extra burden. Masking or bottling up one's emotions is not a healthy coping mechanism, as it can oftentimes lead to feelings of isolation and it makes teenagers feel like there's no proper or helpful support system inside the house, which leads to a depletion of mental health. The death of a friend. The death of a friend is a great loss in many teenagers' lives, as many of us rely on our friends for support, guidance, and feedback. The academic paper, Adolescent Social Networking Following the Death of a Peer, written by Amanda L. Williams, portrays the idea that many teenagers look for their friends for support due to the fact that around this time, teenagers are asking themselves questions to try and find out who they are. However, the death of a friend can greatly interfere with that, oftentimes creating high amounts of grief. As we can see from the first graph, average number of comments posted to website profiles over the course of 12 months following each peer's date of death, we can see that although the comments do decrease as time passes, some teenagers try to maintain an attachment with their deceased peers, constantly posting no matter how long the time has passed. With my second graph, which shows the resulting thematic categories present in all profiles, which illustrates the idea that all the comments under the post talk about are comments directed towards the deceased or comments with memorial sentiments. However, what I want to focus on is the indicators of emotional or cognitive coping strategies. What this thematic category shows is just any comment that shows some form of emotional coping being used. This thematic category had a variety of responses, with some teenagers feeling depressed and talking about how miserable their lives were now that they lost their friends. Others using humor to cope with the fact that they won't ever see their friends again, and some even being angry at the fact that their friend died, blaming them for all the grief and pain that they've caused after the fact that they died. While all of these responses are very different, they're all valid due to the fact that there is no right or wrong way to deal with death or cope with death. However, what all of these responses do show is that the grief that is caused from the death of a friend can greatly impact the lives of teenagers. Grief and bereavement. The grief and bereavement that is caused from the death of a loved one are the main contributors to depression and anxiety in teenagers. The academic paper, It's Complicated, Adolescent Grief in the Time of COVID-19, written by Luz Weinstock, describes the importance of support groups. by illustrating the idea that without them, adolescent bereavement can become troublesome, oftentimes casting problems in the work life and in school, and just overall depleting the quality of life in teenagers. Additionally, the academic paper developments of manifestation of grief in children and adolescents, caregivers as grief felicitators, written by Lauren Alves, explains how the loss of a loved one can create identity crisis. This is mainly due to the fact that teenagers can feel a sense of shame when speaking about the loss of a loved one, due to the fact, due to the fact that all of the peers that surround them don't know the situation that they're going through, which can create a feeling of isolation and alienation, which in some cases can lead to suicidal thoughts. My solutions. The solution to my argument would be to find and create stable support groups. As it was previously discussed in this presentation, these support groups can really make the difference in teenagers' life when dealing with the death of a loved one, as they can create healthy ways to cope with grief, and overall just understanding the fact that they won't see their friends again. One limitation to the solution would be the stigmatization of grief. The biggest limitation to my solution is the stigmatization of grief in modern culture. Majority of jobs in the UK and United States do not provide or have bereavement policies or any type of grief counseling. This factor greatly invalidates teenagers' feelings, which worsen their mental health, creating feelings creating feelings of alienation, isolation, and just overall creating the idea that teenagers are alone. Thank you.
All right, so I have two questions for you. First up, how did your research question evolve as you kind of went through this whole process?
I would say that my research question evolved as I kind of went through this whole entire process. At first, I was just gonna talk about how the grief created would affect teenagers as a whole. However, as I tried to find more research, I wanted to make my research question more specific by aligning an age group,
Okay. And if you had more time, what additional research would you have conducted?
If I had more time, I would definitely want to do more additional research on how the grief can affect teenagers in the future, as most of my research focused on the now and the present of the effects right after the death of a peer. I would really like to focus on how the grief and the bereavement and just the death of a friend and a lost one can impact teenagers over time.